Welcome to the Modern Carnivore Podcast, a guide for those interested in hearing more about hunting, fishing, and other paths to eating more responsibly. Now, here's your host, Mark Norquist.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Modern Carnivore Podcast. Today, I am joined by Davin Brandt. I got to know Davin as a co-member of the Minnesota DNR R3 Council. That's a lot of letters, but basically it is a council put together by the Minnesota DNR to focus on recruiting new hunters and anglers. Davin is the founder and executive director for a nonprofit called Minnesota Steelheader. And this organization is focused on the education and introduction of steelhead fishing to people. And I think you'll enjoy today's conversation. It's springtime right now. We're in the middle of this craziness of COVID-19 with people keeping their distance. And we talk about what steelheading means to the North Shore of Minnesota, how that fits into the greater context of steelhead. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. Okay, welcome to this episode of the Modern Carnivore Podcast. Today I am joined by Davin Brandt, who is the founder and director of Minnesota Steelheader. Great to have you on, Davin.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So we're doing this podcast via Zoom, like so many things these days in this new normal we are in. And so let's just jump right into it. We're sort of right in the height of steelhead season here in Minnesota, which a lot of people don't know maybe that we got steelhead in Minnesota. And that now is the time to catch them. But let's back up a little bit and maybe just let's start with an explanation for people who might not be familiar with it. What is a steelhead, and why is there mystique around it?
It's a great question. Great question. Steelhead, actually, Mark, it's a rainbow trout. But steelhead are, when most people think steelhead, they think of the Pacific Northwest. And so it's a migratory rainbow trout. In the traditional sense, they spend their life growing out in the Pacific Ocean, and then they migrate back, a lot of times back to the stream where they had started. And so they go back and they spawn, and then those fish will rear in those rivers for 1 to 2, sometimes 3 years, and then head back to the ocean, live a few more years, and then return to spawn. Unlike salmon, the steelhead can spawn over and over again. They do not die after they spawn like salmon do. So that's one unique characteristics. The steelhead in Lake Superior, or in all the Great Lakes, in fact, all the Great Lakes do have various strains of steelhead. In Lake Superior, we do have a naturalized Pacific steelhead. It was actually introduced in the late 1800s. I think
was that long ago?
1883. I've got it on my other screen here. 1883 is when they were introduced, and they've naturalized. We actually have a naturalized strain, and we actually discovered that I believe this last year through some genetic work that the DNR was working on. So it's a Lake Superior naturalized strain of steelhead.
So using that term naturalized, a lot of times people talk about native trout versus stock trout.
Sure.
Naturalized would be an introduced trout, but it is now part of the natural reproduction cycle within that water system. Correct? Exactly.
That's exactly right. So it's a self-sustaining. There was times decades ago where due to overfishing, primarily, the numbers were depleted so far that we currently have a catch and release only. But those fish are naturally reproducing, and they have a sustained population. In fact, the numbers are coming back, and that's primarily, I think, due to the no harvesting, catch and release only fishery. So.
Yeah,
they are. They aren't natural. Those rainbow trout are not natural in Lake Superior or the salmon. It's the coastal brook trout and the lake trout, and that's it, which are still there.
Yeah, yeah. And so, like you said, I think most people think of steelhead, Pacific Northwest, Alaska, et cetera, as the areas. And I remember years ago when I realized there was steelhead in Lake Superior. I just found it fascinating because for those who aren't familiar with the North Shore of Minnesota, Highway 61 as your T-shirt
Yes, look at that.
The Steelhead Highway. I love it. Give a little bit of background on the region, the area that Minnesota Steelheader focuses on.
We focus on all the waters, or all the Minnesota waters of Lake Superior. And in fact, there is some steelhead water. Some of my friends might not be excited for me to mention it, but even down in the Blackhoof River, which is not even on the North Shore, but that's just south of Duluth. But so from that area all the way up to the Canadian border, all those waters, about 150 miles along that Steelhead Highway. It's arguable. I'm sorry?
How many streams?
Yeah, it's arguable how many actually will hold fish, and it depends on the year. Right now, in 2020, there's a fair amount of water, and so it should be a good run in a lot of the streams and rivers. It's approximately 60. Some people will say there's only 40, there's only 20 really good ones, but you'd be surprised how much these little rivers, or what I call skinny water, can hold fish. You drive over these rivers in July, and there can be no water coming out of them. But in April and sometimes May, you'll get steelhead.
I think that is one of the things that is fascinating for people who are new to stream fishing for trout to discover, which is how little water there needs to be really for holding some fish. I remember years ago when I started stream fishing for the first time and just being amazed at how skinny little water, as you said, could be holding fish. And I'm talking, smaller fish, brookies, browns, in Wisconsin or southeast Minnesota that have fish, just these small little pieces of water, and obviously a lot bigger water up on the North Shore, and for probably what you're talking about with steelhead. But I love that idea of the potential for big and little water to be holding fish, and creates the opportunity, I think, to really get out there and have a little journey, and let's go try this little piece of water. Maybe there's some fish in there.
And we have all sorts of different types of water. We have we divide the North Shore into three sections: the lower shore, the middle shore, and the upper shore. And there's different watersheds for each of these areas. Mainly the South Shore, or not the South Shore, the lower shore doesn't have the same headwaters as you'll find in the middle and the upper. Middle and the upper, some of their headwaters are in the boundary waters, and so there's a good water source. And just going into the geology and just the way the land is, it's different. You have different types of flow and different types of sediment and things like that. But there's some rivers, Mark, honestly, there's a couple little rivers you can jump across.
Yeah.
Not a broad jump probably, but you could jump across it. And on average, probably the average area that people fish is like a rural street, the width of a rural street. And so that's the water that, most of it encompasses. But we do have a couple of pretty large rivers. There's oftentimes you'll be fishing in the spring and you'll have whitewater, kayakers, going by and so forth. So there's some of the rivers are fairly big. There's some guys that use, the swinging method with spey rods in those rivers, and sometimes some other different types of methods. But so what I'm trying to say is the North Shore rivers, in those, whatever you want to say, 40 to 60 rivers, go look at the maps. You can check on our website. You can see all these rivers on the maps that we offer there. So Mark, we have all sorts of different types of water on the North Shore. Some of the water you can actually jump across. It's not very wide. But the average rivers that people will fish is probably about the width of a rural street. Some of them are wider, and some of them offer the ability for anglers to use some different angling methods, such as spay fishing, so our spay casting and things like that. But it's quite diverse in that 150-mile stretch.
So steelhead as an anadromous fish, always hard for me to say that
No,
word.
it's a tough one.
Heading back out to the big water that historically has been saltwater.
Correct.
In this case, is heading out to a huge lake, huge freshwater lake, and then returning to its birth area on the stream. So a couple things around that, questions around that. First of all, these streams, a lot of the North Shore rivers, as I understand it, are not spring fed, or they're minimally spring fed, and so there's a lot of variability in the water levels, winter versus spring versus summer, that they can be, like you said, raging with white water in the early springtime, and then by late summer just a trickle. How does that affect both the way that the fish cycles through its movement and how you fish it?
That's a big question. We actually answer that in one of our clinics, Mark. We offer free clinics. You can go to our webpage and see that, but we go into the...
What's the website address?
MinnesotaSteelheader.com. And on the homepage, you'll find some links. It's our fall clinic in particular. These are free clinics. They're streamside clinics that... quite honestly, they're just jam-packed full of information. But one of our instructors goes into detail about the geology and the obstacles that migratory fish on Lake Superior have by way of, it goes into pH level of the water and the temperatures and the flow and all that. So it goes into a lot of that. So I'll refrain from boring you on all those specifics, but that has, you're right, the headwaters of these rivers fluctuate. And so some of them, they come from marshy areas on the lower shore. It's usually marshy areas, things like that. So in drier years, the water gets really, really low. In big rains, you get flashy and they can get blown out. When we say blown out, it's taking the bedrock and it's just pushing it out, sometimes changing the way that the streams flow. In the middle and northern region of the North Shore, like I said, they do have more of lakes as headwaters. For instance, the Poplar River, which runs through Lutsen, there's Poplar Lake, and there's feeder streams, and there's probably springs back in the woods that are helping to keep those rivers from getting too low. But they all get a little low. But for migration, you steelhead migrate mainly in the spring. You can catch them in the fall, but it's a little different reason why you catch them in the fall. But the North Shore, they come in after ice out, and it's almost always going to be high water situations, and they'll come in as that water warms up. They come in and they'll spawn. That can take a couple days and can take a couple weeks, depending on how long. And then they leave and they spend their life growing out in Lake Superior. However, when they spawn, those little guys stay in the rivers, and we really want them to stay in the rivers for at least a year, if not two, to even more. The longer they stay in the river, the bigger they get. Unfortunately, some fish are leaving some rivers at what we call year zero, where they're these little guys. So they're like a year old, they're really small, and now they're going out in the lake, and we have the cormorants, the gulls, the lake trout, coastal brook trout, and their mortality rate is extremely high.
Are they leaving earlier because the rivers are warming, getting too warm, or what's the primary driver of them leaving so early?
I don't have any facts in front of me. My speculation is it's warmth. It's warm. It's warmth and then habitat, which kind of coincide with each other. And it's been documented through the fish trap that's at the Knife River. At the DNR, they see them coming back down, and you have fish coming back down that are 1 inch, maybe 2 inches long, and they shouldn't be coming down. So So what I would say, you can, in the summertime, you can catch some of these steelhead in the rivers. You can catch a 2-year-old fish is going to be in that 9 inch range. A 3-year-old fish could be up into that 12 to 13 inch range. And so, you know, in these larger rivers where you have like the deep, cool pools underneath, you know, shade, you can actually catch these young steelhead throughout the year. The season is actually open from the barriers. Every river has a boundary, a downstream boundary. You can learn about that on our website too. We have all this information. The DNR shares this. Those seasons are open continuously. So, but the issue is ice.
So you're around 365 days.
365, but you got to deal with ice. You know, a lot of times they get frozen over.
Yeah. So, do you hear people from other areas of the country, let's say the Pacific Northwest or anglers from other regions who would say, yeah, you really don't have steelhead in that these fish are anadromous going out into the big lake, but it is a freshwater lake. It's not truly the ocean, salt water. Do you hear that?
You know, I personally don't hear it. It's probably because, you know, people don't like to talk to someone directly, but I'm sure it's probably said. And one of my comments was, well, the strain came from your backyard, came from the Pacific. And, you know, that's an opinion. And, you know, we can just agree to disagree on that one. You know, they are a naturalized fish, and it is a very specific strain that has adapted over, you know, over 100 years. And it actually is unique to Lake Superior.
Yeah.
In fact, even compared to, well, and there's several strains that have been stocked by different jurisdictions. I'm not an expert on all that, but, you know, depending on what lake you're at, there's probably 3 or 4 different strains, and you know, someone's going to watch us and correct me on that. So no, there's actually, but and they're different. They take on their different characteristics. Some are a little bit longer and sleeker, and some are a little bit shorter and fatter. And the fish you catch on Lake Superior, they're going to be a different size than the fish you catch on Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
And the main reason for that is Lake Michigan is a lot warmer due to it's a lot shallower. Lake Superior is cold. It's cold and it's not very fertile. It doesn't have quite the amount of forage. But I think the main reason that these fish just don't get as big is because their growing life cycle, it's cold. It's just really cold. So the average, you know, you're probably going to ask me, so what's the biggest fish? So I'm trying to read your mind here. And I had a guy send me a picture of a 34-inch steelhead. I know Scott Thorpe, who's a wonderful advocate for the fishery. He's a retired guide now, instructor and so forth. He holds the record. I want to say it was 17 pounds.
Wow.
Scott, correct us. But I think it's 17 pounds. I don't remember how long it was. Most people in the catch and release fishery are just giving you lengths. So that's why you're going to hear a length rather than a poundage. Scott ended up mounting that one. That was, I think, back in the 70s, maybe late 80s, or excuse me, early 80s. But I know just recently, a month and a half ago, one of our instructors caught a 32-inch fish. So my general rule of thumb, when you do the calculations, the average, if it's 30 inches or more, it's, or I should say that 30 inches, you're looking at approximately a 10-pound steelhead. So
what's that?
32 is a trophy.
What's that fish over your shoulder there?
That fish over my shoulder, that guy, look at that. This is a coaster brook trout. And that is one of the native fish that is actually in a rehabilitation program right now. And that I've been looking for that for 30 years. And I caught her, let's see, about 4 years ago now. Wow. While steelhead fishing. So it wasn't even during their fall migration. The coaster brook trout migrate and spawn in the fall, but they'll come in the spring because they can smell those rivers and get the flavor of what's going on, and they know there's eggs in there. And so they'll come in and they'll feed on the eggs of steelhead. Okay. So that's
what time of year did you catch that one?
That was late April. I believe it may have been like the last weekend in April, which is a great time to go steelheading, or it could have been in May. I think that one was in April, late April. And you can see there, if you can see, let me grab it here. I have what I put a piece of paper in front of it. See if we can see that.
There we
can
go.
Talk a little bit more on that later. Let me see. I don't know how well the focus is working, but what that is it's a little bead, smaller than a marble, and then I've got a number 6 octopus hook on there. And you can see where that bead is. That's actually where it was when I caught it, or close to. You don't actually put it on the hook. I can talk to you more about that, but that's actually what that brook trout hit on.
So, when I've gone fishing for salmon in Alaska, and during the run, sockeyes and kings, where you're basically presenting something in front of them and getting that aggression bite, right? It's not a feeding bite. Is there a similarity with the steelhead, or is it an active feeding?
It's tough when it's cold. Like right now, the water temp, depending on the river you're at, is probably in the mid to high 30s. It'll be lower 30s in the morning, afternoon. Today, I'm looking out my window here. It's a sunny day. I'm not on the North Shore, but if it's sunny, that's going to help warm up that water, and that water can actually go from 34 to 38 degrees in the same area just in that given day. And to us, that might not seem like a lot, but for a cold-blooded fish, that's a big difference. And so the warmer that water gets, Mark, the more active the fish get. That doesn't necessarily mean the more hungry they get. But fish, they'll actively take flies. They'll actively, especially when you get the young fish. You'll get fish that are what we call like a skipjack. So it could be kind of an immature steelhead. I say immature, but it's just a young steelhead that came back, and maybe he's only 16 inches. The average steelhead probably is between 21, 22 up to 28 inches. That's going to be your average range. So you get these younger 16 to 18 inches. They'll come in and they're super aggressive, and they'll easily go after a streamer type fly. When the water's cold, people typically will use things that have a little scent, maybe use a little scent on whatever they're using to fly, or a lot of people use spawn. They use Kamloops rainbow trout spawn, or maybe some salmon spawn, and then that has a little scent, and that scent draws those fish to it. But yeah, those, they're there to spawn, but these fish aren't their body isn't absorbing all the nutrients to stay alive to spawn like a salmon will. The salmon, they're basically eating themselves to sustain that energy to go. And the steelhead don't have to do that. So they're going to get hungry. And if something comes by them, they're opportunistics. Hey, this comes by, I'm going to grab that and eat it. So as the water warms, they become more active.
And like you said, and I forget if we mentioned this earlier or not, but again, salmon, anadromous situation, they're going up to spawn, then they're going to die. Mm-hmm. Steelhead, they keep living, so they head back out into the big water and they stay alive. They come back multiple times, correct?
That is correct, and they can come back 4 or 5 times. And so you think about this, back in the 70s, when they were just, there's a pretty heavy harvest, and you're out there, you're getting that at first year, that 4-year-old fish that's coming back to spawn for the first time, and it's harvested. That fish put back, if it came back 4 or 5 times, just 3 or 4 times, you just think about the thousands of eggs that had the opportunity to grow in and to increase that population. So that's the challenge with fishing for fish that you're targeting while they're actually migrating, while they're actually getting ready to spawn. And so you're actually removing that next year class, or that year's year class out of the water by harvesting. So the catch and release for steelhead, it's huge. It's really making a difference. There's people that think it's ready to actually be lifted, and our organization feels that I think it needs to stay catch and release for a little while longer.
How long has the catch and release been in place?
That's a really, really good question, and I'm going to mumble out an answer. It's 10 years. I don't have those numbers. It's been quite a while.
Okay.
It's not just the last couple of years.
It's
been over a decade.
A number of years.
Yeah, it's been like that for a while. Just to try to get the numbers to come back. There has been stocking, and you can tell a stocked fish from a naturalized fish in Lake Superior. There's going to be fin clips, maybe tags. They mark them so that anglers can tell. Yeah. In fact, while we're on that, Mark, you should know that there's another strain of rainbow trout in Lake Superior that those that have fished will know about it. But if you don't even know about the fishery, there's called a Kamloops rainbow trout. To the average person, they look identical. It's a big rainbow trout, and what they were introduced decades ago as a way to supplement the fishery. Because the fishery went catch and release, I'm going to go back into the 80s. And the Kamloops were, I think it was like late 70s, the Kamloops were introduced. And it was a way to supplement the steelhead fishery. Since then, that Kamloops program actually just was suspended a couple of years ago. And that was suspended after a genetic research project that we were actually part of with the DNR that discovered there was interbreeding. The Kamloops were interbreeding with the steelhead, and even though they look the same, they have different characteristics. Kamloops don't tend to fight as much. They don't have that fiery instinct that a steelhead does, but they're there for people to catch. So I bring that up because how you tell the difference, they have a clipped adipose fin, and I can show you. I don't know if I can see it very well. Right here, this little fin here is called an adipose fin. It's about the size of your thumb. Maybe if I put that there, you can sort of see that.
Yep.
They can get actually as big as a human's thumb, like a man-sized thumb on these larger 30-inch fish. But those are clipped. So if you catch a rainbow trout and that's gone and it's healed over, that's the important thing. There's a whole other thing about some of these aren't healed over, and I'm not sure why that's happening. But when it's healed over, that means that fish had been clipped at stocking, and that is a harvestable fish. So that's been suspended. And now we got some anglers saying, well, what are we going to do? We don't have any rainbow trout to keep. Well, those Kamloops are still in. There's still a few years or at least a couple of year classes left to be caught. So people are catching them this year. The DNR has since started stocking steelhead that have a clipped adipose. So now the rainbow trout, the idea is the rainbow trout will all the rainbow trout will be this naturalized strain. That's what we're trying to get, this Kamloops strain out of some of these steelhead that we're seeing that have some strain in them, the Kamloops strain in them. So by introducing a population of harvestable steelhead with that clipped adipose, we're going to hopefully be able to get back to that nice naturalized, unique steelhead strain that we have.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear. So let's since we talked a little bit about catch and release, let's talk about method of fishing and what Minnesota Steelheader supports and or promotes and or is open to, given that catch and release as a strategy is obviously very popular with within the fly fishing community. Maybe less so in other methods if you're spin fishing or you're doing other things, but not always the case. But yeah, so is your organization a fly fishing group or what?
Well, we don't. That's a good question, actually. I think we don't uphold a style of fishing at the forefront of our organization. We're about informing and educating and inspiring anglers to just really provide them the information to go find their own adventure. And how they do that is up to them. We have suggestions and we have methods that us as the directors within Minnesota Steelheader like to use. At our clinics, it's typically a fly, and there's specific reasons that I can go into in just a bit. But we always encourage people, bring your fly. This is what we recommend, and we recommend it specifically because it can help improve your success rate if you learn this new style. And you'll see a lot of different fisheries have that. You know, you go to a different lake in a different part of the world or country, whatever, they say, this is how we're doing it. You can bring your methods, and you might catch fish, but if you follow their advice, you know, their fly or their lure, you might be more successful. So, you know, we use fly rods a lot, but sometimes those fly rods have no fly line on them. Sometimes they're rigged up on the reel, just just monofilament fishing line. Some have fly line, some have different types of fly line. Spinning, some of our own directors like to use spinning during certain times of the year. So we don't care. If you come to our clinic with a spin cast rod and a red and white bobber, I don't care. It's not about looks or about, you know, some sort of, you know, elitist attitude. It's about, you know, what are you comfortable with? Bring that, and we'll show you how to use that. But then we're also going to show you another opportunity and show you that, you know, if you change that a little bit, even with what you have, let's modify it. Now try this. And it's introducing them to something new and different, and potentially maybe something that they might find, hey, I see the advantages, and might go into trying a different option. But, you know, yeah, we're not these fly fishing snobs that a lot of people talk about. Fly fishing snobs. I actually don't really even know any, to be honest. But there's this like narrative out there that they exist somewhere.
No, I think there is. And I love that your organization has that approach and that attitude. I always say I'm a generalist outdoors person in all aspects, hunting and fishing. I used to fly fish a lot. I hope to get back to doing more fly fishing here again soon. As I think I mentioned to you a couple months ago, I just replaced my 8-weight, and that I'd love to get out doing and do some steelhead fishing here soon with a fly. Now, that being said, I like the aspect of just being open to whatever method somebody's comfortable with, and especially when it comes to, you know, bobber fishing. I think for somebody who's brand new, absolutely try what you're comfortable with. If you want to do some garden hackle, get those night crawlers out, and it'll be good.
But just so you know, when you're on the water, you talk to someone who's out fishing, it looks like he knows what he's doing. He'll never use the word bobber. It's a float or a strike indicator.
Exactly.
You know, there is a little bit of snobbery going on there. They don't want to be. I always poke fun because I rarely will use the strike indicator, but there's times when it makes a huge difference. But I like to rib my fishing companions that fish them all the time and poke them with their bobber.
I was out fishing recently and on a stream not too far away here in this area of the state, and I hadn't been out in a while, and my eyes have just been changing so much over recent years, and I had to put a pretty good strike indicator on.
Yes. Yeah, and even tying just tying flies, and I've got right in front of me in case I got to read any notes. This is it. I need these. A great option is you can get with your sunglasses. You can go to your eye doctor. You can get bifocals put in, so they're cheaters. It's actually it's affordable, and it's a great way. So you still got your eye protection from the sun and from stray flies, but you also can see what you're tying.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm right there, and this is the year of where it's difficult. I'm progressively having to move further out. But I haven't gotten into. Here's the thing: is I always said with fly fishing, I always say I'm not a fly fisherman, but I do use that method quite often, and I say that from the standpoint of my brother, as an example, avid fly fisherman, ties all of his own flies. You know, when he and I went to Alaska 20-some years ago, he tied every single one of his own flies based on every species of fish we were going after. I bought my flies, and then actually for the bigger fish, use spin gear because I couldn't afford an 8 or a 10-weight rod at that point. But that being said, so again, method-wise, I love fly fishing. If I'm on the stream, I have used spinning gear, but I am going to default to fly fishing. Are you that way? And then do you tie your own flies? And let's talk a little bit about what kind of patterns you use then for
Sure.
steelhead, and you just showed us that egg pattern. But what do you what's your approach?
Sure. Okay. You got a lot there, but I can answer that. My first steelhead I caught. This is going to date me a little bit. I caught in 1984, and I caught it on spinning gear, big pool, and using spinning equipment.
Rapala?
No, it was a Vibrix spoon.
Okay.
I said a spoon spinner. Vibrix spinner with a yellow tail. It's what I had, and I had experienced inland brook trout fishing in the Arrowhead region, which is basically that whole North Shore, Minnesota. Some people call it the Arrowhead region, and so it was a big pool, and the best way to fish a big pool, it's like a lake, that's spinning, and I could control it. I had trees behind me. I was I think a senior in high school. I'm really dating myself now. And that's what I had. I had a fly rod. I just that to me was the best way to do it. Now I will be using a fly rod, the rod all the time, and I will be using a fly reel most of the time. Some guys will use a fly rod with a spinning reel. What makes a fly rod so wonderful is its length. Sometimes it's hard to get the right action rod that is 9+ feet long. In spinning gear, sometimes it's really soft and there's not a lot of backbone in some of that. And in these rivers, it's nice to have a little backbone. You get that current as well as a potential large fish, and you need to have that backbone to be able to control that fish. Otherwise, they can take you all the way to the lake and you lose the fish. So I typically use a 9 foot, 9 to 9.5 foot 8-weight fly rod. And I have several different types of setups that I use on my reel. And most people, I'm guessing, most people watching this probably know a little bit about fly fishing, but this is one of my first reels. This is
It's like a Fluger medalist.
It's a Fluger, and I had a Martin multiplier, which I couldn't find. I don't know what happened, but I probably paid like $25 for this.
Right.
Now, so you can get by with this. This actually has fly line on it. Or, nowadays everyone gets the fancy ones and they got to spend $100 or $200. I got a rod here. You can kind of see these larger arbors, and it gets faster retrieve and all this fanciness. But it's not, to me, I'm not hung up on these fancy reels. As long as it's got an okay drag, I'm fine with it. It's holding my line, and you get enough experience that a lot of the fighting is really in that rod and how you hold that fish. Reeling it in is, you can hand line them or reel them, whatever. Going back to how I set those up. Sometimes it's fly line, a weight forward fly line with a leader and tippet and a fly. And that's real common. The problem on North Shore rivers in the spring is they have, where the steelhead are either in shallow riffly water that could be anywhere from 1 to 3 feet and variable currents. So depending on how far out you're fishing, I mentioned, the average river is about the width of a street, a rural street. So in that length from closest to far away, there's varying current speeds. And so throwing out a floating weight forward fly line like you would on maybe a southern Minnesota trout stream or something, maybe out west, a nice gradual or a slower moving stream. That fly line goes all over the place, and that fly sometimes has a really hard time getting down to the water that you think those fish are in that's in front of you. And that might be the size of a bathtub. It might be the size of a car. It might be 18 feet long, 16 feet long, 12 feet, 8, whatever. And a lot of times they could be deeper troughs. And getting that fly down to them, because these fish will primarily be closer to the bottom than at the surface. They're not feeding up on dry flies. They're going to stay down there. If your fly is over their head, you're just going to miss them. So you got to get your fly to them. The way to get the fly to them is weight. You either weight the fly or you weight the line. And I do both. And most successful anglers that are experienced do both. So with adding the weight to the line, there's a couple of different methods that you can do. Some people just put split shot right on their leader or on their tippet, sometimes with a 3-way swivel or dropper line, or they'll just pinch it right on there. So there's many methods that you can do there. with that. Or what I first started off doing, I just followed the guys in my college fishing club and some of these old timers, and they would take these fly reels and they would just get 8-pound test Maxima fishing line. And Maxima fishing line, for most people that I fish with, that's the go-to line. It's just the Maxima Ultra Green. There's a plug for Maxima. And you just spool it up, and that's it. No fly line. You spool it up and you use a fly rod and you just run line. And people think, well, that's kind of crazy. You're not really fly fishing. It's like, no, you're not. But you're utilizing the fly rod and the fly reel in combination because it's a good way to deliver what we're going to set up. So the first way that I did it is just like that. You got the line, you're running it through, you go on and you tie on a fly. And then 18 inches up, pinch a split shot. Pinch another one if you need it to get it down. And you're basically taking that line and you're throwing it out upstream, quartering upstream generally, and you're going to let that bounce. You want it just to tick, 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 tick on the bottom. Tick, tick, tick. So if you have spinning gear and you do that, and it's fast water, it's literally, it hits the water and reel it in. And reel it in. There's a lot going on here with spinning stuff. With a fly rod, you can lob it out there. You can have the line in my hand, and I can be pulling it as the line comes close to me. I can pull it like this, and it gets to the end, pull it back to bring the line up and lob it. It's called chuck and duck. And so fly rod, it's this. I mean, it's this. There's a rhythm that you can get. And so you don't really need the fly line for those applications. And that's how I learned to fish. You go up the shore, and a lot of the old timers still, that's all it is monofilament. All it is monofilament. So you don't really, and there's times in the spring when it's fast like this, it might look like I have a fly line because I have a little different setup with some running line that would be the equivalent of like 18-pound tests, high vis. But it serves the same purpose. It's a monofilament, and it allows me to be able to get my line out there. It's not the big diameter that fly line has that can get pulled in various currents. So there's a lot of different methods. You mentioned flies. I do tie my flies. I tie out of necessity. I don't have the patience to just sit and tie flies like some of my friends do. So I'll tie out of necessity. But a lot of what I use, Mark, are yarn flies. And yarn flies, typically it's something that you'd tie on, and it's used to simulate like an egg pattern. When I say egg pattern, it'd be like a salmon egg pattern or steelhead egg pattern. Yeah.
Are you on that faster water? You're using a high vis mono or a fly line, or how often are you using a strike indicator?
You know, in fast water, I never use strike indicators, and part of it is because that's how I learned to feel. And so there's guys that just learn to feel. I don't want to be watching something to see if I got something. I want to feel it.
Yeah.
I keep a tight line, and I miss them. There are a lot of times you're missing fish that they sucked it in and spit it out just like that. And so you're constantly setting the hook or tightening your line a little more to see. But I will use a strike indicator. There's times, depending on the flow. Well, it's all dependent on the flow, but it's usually later in the season. So this is into May. Water's level's usually down. It's slow. I need to get my fly down. I happen to grab my rod that just has mono, so I don't have the fly line to float and help me go across that slow water. So now I'm stuck with my mono setup, and I got to put weight on there to get the fly out there, but then it just goes and sits on the bottom. So a float helps with that. You can get a float, put it up to 36 inches or however deep it is, and throw it in that slow water against that rock cliff bank, and then just let it drift. So there's times when a float, it's deadly. But or in pools, there's times that I got friends that will use night crawlers. They'll use night crawlers or other plastics or things like that. They'll float in these pools where they have eddies and the water just sits in spins, and they'll throw their float on out there and just let it sit and spin, and it's just moving by itself. Let it work it, and they catch fish that way. So,
and how often do you see people with two-handed spay?
You know, there's two rivers, and I don't mind saying that the Brule, Minnesota Brule, and the Baptism River are two largest rivers. So they have large enough water where they have these stretches where you have the water that is conducive to that style. Other than those rivers, and even on much of those rivers, it's flashy, meaning you have these areas where you have these short pocket water, and the river drops pretty fast. And that spade, that two-handed, you need pretty consistent flow with that, not all this rocks and boulders and little falls and things like that. So you see it, but not very often.
So yarn flies, mono, on a fly rod, some of the things you do, springtime fishing. These are some of the aspects of it. So if people want to, I guess maybe let me ask you about this. So it's catch and release. What would you recommend? We obviously want to be very careful with these fish. So if somebody's going to get started in steelhead fishing in Minnesota, as an example, or anywhere, I guess, what do you recommend for getting started?
Great question. You can spend as much as you want, or get in for the bare bones with just a simple fly rod and fly line. And that's what I would recommend to get started. It really doesn't take much. Flies can be overwhelming. The whole fly fishing can be overwhelming. The fishery is overwhelming because of 150 miles of rivers, and I don't know where to go, and where's my access points, and I've never done it before. I'm a little apprehensive. All these guys out there, I don't want to look like I'm doing the wrong thing. It's pretty easy. I encourage people to check out our website, and I say that because everything that we're offering, it's free. We're a Minnesota nonprofit. Our clinics are free. They're streamside clinics where we require registration. It's limited because we're going to get on the water, and we limit to about 12 people, and we get you on the water and we show you how to use these techniques. Well, first we're off the water and we do a little educational thing about steelhead, about equipment, and why we use what we use, and then we get on the water. So there's some tools at our website that you can find some of this. Getting into steelheading, I know I've had the question a lot, and people seem to be just a little, I don't know what the word is. It's difficult, so they just don't know where to go because there's so many things. You go on YouTube and it's, you get a lot of people that are telling you to use, you got to use an 8-weight, you got to use this and that, and people are going, I don't even know what is an 8-weight? I don't even know what the heck that is. I'm new to this. I don't know. I'm a bass fisherman, but I want to give it a go. One, you can send us an email with a specific question. You can reach us on Facebook or Instagram or through our website. We're happy to answer questions if you have anything specific. But generally speaking, with the time frame we have here, a 9-foot fly rod with a fast tip on it. So it's got a little bit of a backbone. 8-weight. It goes down to 1-weight and goes up to probably 14-weight or maybe even more. Really, what that means to the average angler is if they put that into conventional fishing, ultralight and heavy duty like musky rods. And fly rods.
Smaller the number, smaller the rod.
Smaller the number, the lighter the action. The rods can all be 9 feet long, but it can be considered an ultralight, and it can be considered like a musky rod. The 8-weight is getting up into that stiff, like a northern rod or whatnot. Most of them will have, I showed you my rod earlier, they'll have this little, too much in my office here, they'll have this little butt section. Some are longer, some are shorter. A lot of the guys will have custom rods, and they'll be a little longer. And that's just for your forward, and that's to help just give a little, these fish can get pretty big and heavy in that current, and that gives you that little extra support in fighting the fish. It makes a big difference. Your average fly rod, your 1 to 6-weight won't even have this on. It'll cut off right about here. So having something with this is nice, and that's 7, 8, 9-weight. Those three are things to look at. I like an 8-weight. And go ahead.
So, we're not necessarily wanting to push anybody into a specific brand or not, but I think for most people, getting into fly fishing for the very first time, they're going to run into combo kits. You could be your scientific anglers or your Shakespeare, or et cetera, or maybe even Daiwa or somebody. Those are generally, like, those combo kits are generally, I've found, like a 4 to 5, 6 weight, something like that, right? So is that big enough to go chase steelhead, or would you recommend getting into it an 8 weight size?
I would say, if you're looking for something that you just want to get one fly rod, you may want to give it a go at your local lake, or maybe you want to do some summer smallmouth fishing somewhere, or maybe take it out west. I would say a 7 weight. It's tough because you start getting into the 6 weight and lower. If you're a skilled angler, I know guys that fish a 6 weight. I know guys that'll fish that. It's lighter action. It doesn't have quite the backbone. So in really fast water, it's hard to put what I call put the brakes to the fish. Tighten that line up and really, really put the brakes to that fish. So it just makes it harder. And imagine fishing with an ultralight and you've got a 28-inch walleye on it. You can do it. It's harder. Throw current in there, and now it's even harder. So part of it is, especially with the catch and release fishery, I encourage people that, fight the fish, but don't fight it longer than you have to, because that's wearing, that's really putting some stress on the fish if you go longer than you have to. So I think I'm really happy with an 8 weight. I do use a 7 weight later in the year, usually May, maybe even into June when the water is not quite as high and it's slower and it's more fun to fish that way. So that's the route then that's with steelhead. With some of the other species that you have in these rivers in the fall, I go down to a 4 weight, and that's just depending on what I'm targeting.
Yeah. So great transition from equipment to responsible catch and release, as you described. I think if you've got too light of a tackle, it can be fun, but you also don't want to play the fish out too long, because that's going to increase the mortality rate of that fish once you release it. Mm-hmm. So in your clinics and when you talk about catch and release, what do you tell people? What guidance do you give to really handling the fish and making sure they're responsibly getting that fish back in the water and keeping that fishery healthy?
One great thing that we'll tell people is, when we take this fish out of the water, just so you realize how much we don't want to keep it out of the water for, is hold your breath during that time. And when you're ready to exhale, that fish is ready to go back into the water. And that's a good rule of thumb. I personally, I don't know how long these fish can be out of the water before it really puts stress on them. But I figure, and what we try to preach is, if you're holding your breath that whole time, great, then you keep the fish out. Quite often on TV shows, you see these guys holding bass or whatnot, and they're talking and they're going on for a couple minutes, and it just drives me nuts. And I'm not too sure if that harms the fish. But for us, what we'd say is keep the fish in the water as long as possible. Bring a net. We're big advocates of nets. There's arguments on what kind of net to use. You can figure that out. The rubber nets or the nylon nets, all these different things. The key is just to keep the fish in the net. So you got them in the water, in the net. Get your camera ready, get your phone. Most people are using this, autofocus, auto everything. While you're fishing, set your phone to the camera mode and tuck it away so that it's ready to go, or get it all ready before you take the fish out. There's been arguments of, do you use a fish glove? Using a fish glove helps to grip the fish better. These fish have a natural coat on them that it makes them really hard to hang on to. They have scales, but they're so small that it almost feels like skin. And so very aggressive and active fish, it can be hard to hang on to them. Don't hang on to them stand up over rocks and gravel, because if you drop them, you're going to drop them into that gravel and it can get their gill plates and all that stuff, stress the fish. So we recommend, if you're fishing alone, get your camera set up, get the timer going, and, grab your fish, take your picture, and then let the fish go again. Same if you have a friend there, have them get the camera ready and then reach in and grab the fish. And what we do is you grab it by the tail. I'm going to use my big one here and I'll show you. So a great way to do it is, on a bigger fish, it's a lot easier. On a little fish, tail's a lot smaller, but it's easy, to grab that fish. I grab it like this, and you can lock your fingers on the back and just lock them in there and then cradle it. I can't squeeze this one because it's so big, but some people sit and they'll squeeze these things and don't. What you want to, this is why you're hanging on to them. It's right here. This is supporting you. You can go take that picture, maybe take your hand away like this, You can do all these kind of fun things that you want to do with that. But the key is, you asked about the catch and release. The key is keep them in the water as long as you can. Pull them out, it's seconds. Take the picture, admire the fish, put it back in the water. You can look at it in the water and let the fish go. If you have a fish that is stressed at all, you dropped it, things happen. It happens to all of us. When you're releasing that fish, just hang on to them. Don't just throw them in the water. Like people sunfish fishing, they just catch them, they throw them off in the water. Hang on to them, point them upstream. Let that water get through their mouth and past their gills. You can just hold them there for a little bit. Let them swim out of your hands. They'll tell you when it's time to go. But by holding them there and allowing that current to pass through their gills, it's getting them oxygen. So we always kind of steer them upstream. Hopefully that answers those questions. We do have some information on our website too on some, for just proper catch and release.
Perfect transition. So what is your website again?
Oh, good one. MinnesotaSteelheader.com.
MinnesotaSteelheader.com. You're the founder and the executive director of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we are on Facebook. The most relevant information the most up-to-date information that you'll find is probably on our Facebook. We do post images on Instagram, but if that's more imagery, Facebook will post. I think today someone posted, they caught it. A couple of our directors live on the North Shore, and he posted a image of or a video of a steelhead swimming away after he caught it. But you'll see a lot of relevant information that is current to what's going on today. Our website is. We do have links to some of this more current information. The website, you're going to find a lot more of the maps, how to engage in our clinics, how to find information on the various genetic studies that we're a part of, information. We adopted the Sucker River several years ago, so you'll find information on our cleanup efforts. You'll find a little bit more of that static stuff, information on what's a steelhead, what's a cam loop, some of the techniques, and some of the management stuff. So we have a little bit all over the place.
It's great to hear. Well, and obviously, right now we're in the middle of this, these stay-at-home orders. So make sure you follow whatever your local guidelines are for getting outside, but not making sure you're responsible about any of your outdoor activities during this time. And Davin, this was a lot of fun talking steelhead with you. This
always fun talking steelheading.
Yeah, absolutely. This endless sea. We'll have to get out fishing when the time is right and have you on again and talk more about it. So
great. I'd love to be on again, Mark.
Thanks so much for your time today, and stay safe out there.
Right on. You too. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
So I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Davin Brandt from Minnesota Steelheader. You can go to MinnesotaSteelheader.com. And also, don't forget, it's also turkey hunting season right now. And at huntingcamp.live, we are offering free turkey clinics. So you can go out and get all of the turkey hunting curriculum for free this spring, since we're all cooped up in our homes. And you can learn a new skill if you haven't been out turkey hunting yet. And I myself will be going out for the first time this year. And that's something we always want to reinforce. No matter how long you've been hunting, you can try something new. So go to huntingcamp.live, check that out, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Modern Carnivore Podcast. You can continue the journey by going to modcarn.com.